In this comparative study, I will discuss the evolution of postmodern slasher films by comparing and contrasting postmodern horror techniques in Halloween, a 1978 film directed by John Carpenter, and Scream, a 1996 film directed by Wes Craven. In the late 70s, slasher movies peaked in the United States as a horror subgenre. They typically feature an effective masked killer who stalks and murders a group of teenagers, often using bladed weapons. This formula leads to a high body count and few survivors. While the exact definition of how postmodernism applies to film may vary, it generally involves blurring the lines between the real and the imagined, the erosion of institutions, and heavy intertextual referencing. These aspects highlight the influence of millennials on mainstream culture and society. Isabel Pinedo argues that horror films made since 1968 can be seen as postmodern, characterized by the following. 1. A violent disruption of the everyday world. Violence is a fundamental element of slasher films, creating a horror by disrupting a sense of normalcy and violating the notion of a predictable world. Postmodernist theory highlights how horror films emphasize the spectacle of the ruined and mutilated body, with a high level of explicit violence, while the classical paradigm focuses on the act of telling. 2. A bounded experience of fear. Postmodern horror films create a space where viewers can confront and engage with their fears in a controlled manner, as the audience is aware of its fictional aspect. Thus, filmmakers encourage viewers to suspend their rational thoughts for the duration of the movie, going vividly through the characters' frightening experiences. 3. A transgression and violation of boundaries. Postmodern slashers violate traditional boundaries established by the classical paradigm. Unlike modern horrors with clear distinctions between good and evil and a predictable conflict outcome that leads to the destruction of the monster, postmodern horrors blurs these lines, resulting in ambiguous outcomes. Moreover, the postmodern horror film blurs the boundaries between subjective and objective representation by violating the conventional cinematic codes that distinguish them. Halloween follows the story of Michael Myers, who escapes from a mental institution 15 years after murdering his sister on Halloween night and returns to his hometown of Haddonfield, where he stalks and kills teenagers, including protagonist Laurie Strode. The movie, one of the earliest slasher films, emerged in a transitional period between modernism and postmodernism, with Carpenter's mixed influences evident throughout the narrative. Unlike typical postmodern slashers, Halloween avoids excessive and bloody violence. Carpenter and cinematographer Dean Cundey opened the film with a first-person point-of-view shot, generating tension and suspense as we witness a murder through young Michael Myers' eyes. The cinematography technique restricts the audience's view of the murder due to Michael's clown mask, as the mask doesn't allow the audience to see the knife penetrating Michael's sister's skin, only giving the audience the impression of the stab. Rather than relying on explicit violence and gore, Halloween creates a sense of tension and suspense characteristic of the classical paradigm of horror filmmaking. The focus on building atmosphere and psychological terror and the subtle approach to violence diverge from postmodern slasher norms, where gore and brutality take center stage. Additionally, Myers' killings often occur off-screen or lack excess brutality, emphasizing psychological horror over graphic violence and aligning with modern horror. Between 1950 and 1970, the United States experienced a substantial rise in suburban neighborhoods. At the time, many American families moved to the suburbs as they wanted to shield their children from the dangerous influences represented by the city, such as easy access to drugs and widespread crime. Therefore, the movie's psychological aspect is accentuated by its menacing suburban mise-en-scène. This setting fails to protect its children and becomes the breeding ground for living nightmares, subverting its expected security. Carpenter manipulates the fore and backgrounds to create a game of now you see him, now you don't with Myers, making the audience reconsider their conception of safety in a suburban setting. This immerses part of the audience likely to live in a setting similar to Haddonfield, with the threats depicted in the movie. Although dangers may be unseen and unexpected in suburban daily life, they're probably masked and present. In addition, Michael's characterization embodies both classical and postmodern elements. Although it's clear that he's pure evil, falling into the classical paradigm, his supernatural-like depiction acting as an unnatural and deviant force is very postmodern.
You can't kill the boogeyman.
His survival, despite being shot 6 times by Dr. Loomis, disrupts the traditional narrative of good prevailing over evil, highlighting the character's helplessness in the face of suburban threats. Amidst the societal upheaval of the era, Halloween also mirrors fears of deteriorating families and Christian values. The film portrays drug use and premarital sex as sinful behaviors, reflecting anxieties about societal decline and moral decay. After engaging in immoral activities, Annie, Linda, and Bob are murdered by Myers, being punished for their acts. This can be seen as a postmodern approach, as it blurs the lines between fiction and reality, reflecting youth's fears about being punished for their sinful behavior, an anxiety potentially brought on by the rise of conservative religious movements. Scream presents a meta-horror narrative centered on Sidney Prescott, a high school student targeted by the masked killer Ghostface in the small town of Woodsboro. Released 18 years after Halloween, Scream emerged during a period where slasher had become formulaic and exhausted.
What's the point? They're all the same. Some stupid killer stalking some big-breasted girl who can't act, who's always running up the stairs when she should be going out the front door. It's insulting.
John Carpenter acknowledges the skepticism of the new audience, believing they are smarter than the movies they watch, and their overfamiliarity with the subgenre.
Because obviously they don't watch enough movies. This is standard horror movie stuff.
As a result, Craven and scriptwriter Kevin Williamson employed meta-cinematic elements in Scream, creating a self-referential and self-horror movie that subverted the audience expectations because of its fresh approach to the slasher subgenre. Unlike Halloween, Scream adopts a more postmodern approach to violence, featuring graphic and brutal killings. In the film's opening scene, Case Becker and her boyfriend Steve are psychologically and physically tortured by Ghostface before being killed. As Casey attempts to escape, she is stabbed multiple times and ultimately hung from a tree with her insides exposed. The difference in the depiction of violence between Halloween and Scream reflects the evolution of postmodern slasher films. While Halloween and earlier slashers like Texas Chainsaw Massacre adopt a more restrained approach to violence, Scream intentionally embraces graphic violence, responding to the American teenagers of the time who grew up in an anxious and economically unwelcoming world, often cheering for the on-screen characters to get slaughtered. In Scream, Craven communicates with an audience overly familiar with the conventions of slasher films, creating a narrative that acknowledges its own status as fiction and incorporates meta-cinematic elements. These elements are communicated through Randy Meeks, who demonstrates self-awareness of horror movie rules and tropes, repeatedly reminding the audience that there are certain rules to survive a horror movie.
There are certain rules that one must abide by in order to successfully survive a horror movie.
For example, he states sex is a sin and that one shouldn't do it to survive a horror movie. Thus, Scream references not only Halloween, as Myers kills Linda and Bob after they have sex, but other slasher films establish this trope. Randy also affirms one should never say "I'll be right back," since they won't. In Halloween, that's true for the character of Bob, who tells Linda he'll be back and gets murdered by Myers. This serves as a meta-construct that reflects the audience's desire for narrative predictability based on previous modernist horror films. Scream's self-awareness extends to characters like Tatum, who asks Ghostface not to murder her because she wants to be in the sequel, expressing awareness of her role in a slasher narrative. Simultaneously, the characters in Halloween don't know they are in a slasher movie, revealing their lack of self-awareness and Carpenter's modernist influences.
Alright, come on, where's my beer?
Scream's postmodern approach to slasher blurs the lines between fiction and reality, as its characters live in the same world as us and are exposed to the same movies and culture. This self-reflexivity creates a boundary-defying experience where the audience sees themselves mirrored in the characters, blurring the distinction between fiction and reality, while heightening the sense of fear within the bounded space of the film. In essence, Scream builds upon the foundation laid by films like Halloween and other classic slashers, but it also reinvents and reimagines the genre in a way that was influenced by the cultural context and cinematic landscape of the 90s. While Halloween belongs to a transitional period between the classical and postmodern paradigms, mostly showing signs of modernist horror, Scream fully embraces the postmodern approach to slashers. Through its embrace of excessive violence, self-awareness, and blurred reality, Scream epitomizes the postmodern slasher, offering a reflection of contemporary fears and narrative expectations. By pushing the boundaries of traditional horror, Scream highlights the evolving nature of postmodern storytelling and the cultural forces that shape it.